Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be dropping a brand new My Hero What If, and today's is kind of a strange one to title because Deku's going to be having so many incredible quirks that I wasn't exactly sure what even to call his ability. So I ended up going with what if Deku had a superhero quirk. And for those of you wondering what that means, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. The dude's gonna fly, the dude's gonna have super speed, super strength, probably X-ray vision, heat vision, and so much more. If I'm being real, the dude is practically gonna be Superman in My Hero, but I didn't exactly want to do another one of those since I've already made 2 of those videos on the channel. So ladies and gentlemen, if you guys go on to enjoy today's video and you guys want to see more of this OP Deku, then leave a like on the video to show some support, because if you guys somehow hit 1,000 likes on this video, then I'll be sure to drop a brand new series in 24 hours. So good luck with that, and to those of you guys that have already seen parts 1, 2, and 3, go to this timestamp up above to watch the rest of the story. But without any further ado, enjoy. Alright ladies and gentlemen, we begin our story with a young Izuku Midoriya. He'd be staring at both of his parents, and all Izuku could hear was screams and yelling. It's at this point that Hisashi, his father, would barge out of the room and slam the door. Inko at this point would go over towards Izuku, tears coming out of her eyes since Hisashi had just left them. And as Izuku would stare at her, he would want to comfort her or say sorry, because Izuku, though he was a baby and couldn't even crawl yet, he understood what was going on. Because Izuku had an intelligence quirk, but not just that, he had everything you could even imagine. Izuku, as he would stare at his mom, would wonder if there's any way that he could distract her. So, in a moment, Izuku, trying to pick his head up, not being able to even do that quite yet, would then start floating in the air, his head kind of dangling down as he's trying to control himself floating mid-air. Inko, seeing this, would say, "Ah, Izuku, you just unlocked your quirk. Sweetie, this is amazing. You're a baby and you can already fly?" She would take the young Izuku with a smile, and as tears would continue pouring down her face, she would say, "I'm so proud of you, Izuku." Izuku in his mother's arms would have a smile, and he'd be like trying to hold at her face, but she's not letting him. But regardless, once she would find this out, she would kind of like set Izuku up with like a harness in case he ever like floats off in the house or something like that. But funny enough, it would never happen. Izuku never exactly just randomly willy-nilly used his quirk. So by the time that Izuku turned 1 year old and was able to crawl and actually float around a little bit whenever his mom wanted him to, you know, just to show off to people, Izuku would do it, aware of what his mom wanted. She'd be like, "Come on, Izuku, go on, show her your quirk, show her your quirk," and Izuku would start flying, you know what I mean? Or floating, technically. But regardless, she would show off Izuku, and she, knowing that Izuku has some sort of flight or float quirk, would think of her son as the most special thing in her life. So, as time would pass, Inko would love Izuku and take care of him, spoiling the kid rotten since he was the only thing that she now had. And though she did have to work 2 jobs to keep them afloat, this was not going to be going on for long, because when Izuku turned 1 year old and was able to have his quirk examined for the first time, she brought him in under the assumption that they were just going to tell her that he had some sort of flight quirk or float quirk, and that's exactly what happened. But interestingly enough, as Izuku grew and by the time that he was 4 years old, come to find out, Izuku wasn't just able to fly, he was strong. Izuku was able to lift up a refrigerator whenever she was cleaning, couches, and even massive boulders, and it almost looked as though it took no effort for him. Izuku was also invulnerable because on one occasion, when Izuku was playing outside with some of his friends, their ball rolled into the street and Deku, going over to chase it, got hit by a car. But interestingly enough, Izuku took no damage. In fact, the car was the only thing that looked hurt. And as Izuku would grow up and attend school, it would also seem as though he had some sort of intelligence quirk. This was insane. Not only did Izuku have the ability to fly, run so fast that he could literally run on water, he was invulnerable and he was intelligent, but Izuku also had an insane breath capacity, meaning that whenever Deku wanted, he could shoot out a breath so powerful it could send full-grown adults flying. Izuku also had eyes that just at looking a person, he could see the quirk that they have above their head, displaying to Izuku what exactly they had as if it was some sort of video game. And not to mention, Izuku also had super hearing, which pretty much means that whenever his mom would call him and go, "Izuku," he could hear her way better. But jokes aside, at just the age of 4, Izuku would have all of these quirks, and it's not like it's something that Deku had to master or train. The second that Izuku started developing these abilities, he was a master at them. It was almost as if it was second nature. And as Izuku would go to school, Izuku would find himself a tall, strong boy, always at the top of his class, always liked by all the young girls around him, and all the other boys would constantly crowd around him. The only person that this would generally affect would probably be Katsuki Bakugo. But even if Bakugo didn't like Izuku, it's not like he could do anything, because on one occasion Bakugo had tried to bully Deku and pick on him to show that his quirk was better. But when he tried to hit an explosion on Deku, it didn't exactly do anything. Izuku just kind of looked at him and was like, "Oh, you want to play heroes?" Then he started flying and shooting his wind breath at Bakugo, which sent the dude flying. So Bakugo didn't exactly try anything against Deku after that. And as time would pass, Deku's popularity would only grow and grow, leaving Katsuki Bakugo in the dust as everybody around him would love Izuku. He was literally your pitch perfect person. In fact, there was even one occasion where as Deku was running to school because he was late, he had spotted an old lady walking across the road, and in the efforts of helping her and walking her down the street, a gang of villains riding this monster truck jeep that had like cannons on it and stuff like that were about to run them over, but Izuku simply staring at them would shoot his laser beam straight down the middle of them, having awakened another quirk. In this moment, the truck itself would split in half and completely avoid hitting them, as Deku would continue helping the old lady down the street, and when the villains would get out of the car going, "Hey, kid, you just destroyed our truck," Deku would simply just look at them, and that would be more than enough to intimidate them. After this, the villains would try to run away, but without any getaway vehicle, the heroes were quickly able to capture them. And stuff like this was just a regular for Izuku. Days would pass, he might unlock a new quirk, he might not, he might just keep them the same. By the way, I'm not going to be like fully set on the quirks that I'm giving Izuku for this specific video, and since this is a part 1, you guys actually have the ability to let me know what you guys want me to give him next. So comment down any cool ideas you guys might have for Izuku's quirks and stuff like that, and I might just add them to the video. Anyways, with that said, as Izuku would grow up, he would only get more and more powerful, eventually actually being scouted by a hero program looking for young talent. And when they find Izuku, let's just say that they feel like they just found a golden goose, because this specific organization found him before anybody else did. So immediately offering Izuku a massive amount of money to be the sponsor of their company and pretty much be the lead of it, Izuku would agree in a heartbeat, understanding that this was a perfect opportunity to save himself and his mom from their lives. Because yeah, he had incredible quirks and gifts and stuff like that, but his mom still had to work, and she had come home from work so tired that there was days where Izuku would get home and honestly there'd be no food waiting for him at home. Inka would constantly apologize to Izuku, saying how sorry she was, but Deku would always tell her not to be sorry, that she's doing her best. So when this day would come, accepting the deal without any second thoughts, Deku would bring a massive check to his mother, saying that they no longer ever have to worry about money again. And let me tell you, it's almost as if the both of them had a waterworks quirk, because the amount of water that filled the apartment was insane. Once they packed their bags and moved to their new house, Izuku would start training with this organization and learning how to use his quirks, quote unquote. Not really, because the dude learned how to do everything pretty easily. So by the time that Izuku would turn 11 years old, he would practically be ready to become a pro hero. And so the agency that would contract Izuku would reach out to the Provisional Hero Agency, telling them that they have to give Izuku an opportunity to take the exam. Because with Izuku's powers, it's a shame that Izuku could be wandering the streets and see crime and not be able to do anything about it. So after seeing how Izuku would perform with a couple of robots and a couple of potential scenarios that Izuku had already been trained to handle, plus with his increased intelligence, Izuku would know how to handle everything perfectly. He would stun them, participating in the provisional hero exams at the age of 11, if not, like, no, I said 11, right? I was gonna say 9, but yeah, no, 11. Anyways, with that said, Izuku would lunge in there and absolutely blow the exam out of the water, destroying UA students, Shiketsu High students, and all other hero core students would be a breeze for him. As Izuku would finish this test up and he would be given his provisional license, the man taking the test, or technically handing out the licenses, would be stunned at Izuku's capability capabilities, with him clearly showing the most promise out of everyone there. Some people even being discouraged, saying, "What? We were beat by a kid? There's no way." But yeah, there was way, because Izuku had a superhero quirk. That's literally what his ability is named. His quirk is called superhero, because that's exactly what the dude is. He's straight out of a comic book. The dude could practically be Superman for all I care. But hey, regardless of that, eventually as more and more time would pass, Izuku would go on to become internet famous. People learning the name Izuku Midoriya before he even graduated high school, and a bunch of hero agencies sending a bunch of internship opportunities and things of the sort. However, Izuku was not going to be able to join those people because of his contract agreement with these guys, pretty much stating that he was going to be under them until his first full year of pro hero work had been accomplished. So all the time that Izuku's going to be attending UA, he's kind of going to be having to listen to all the people who had been pretty much sponsoring his life to this point. So with that said, I think it's safe to say that we could skip to the entrance exam, which is going to be very, very easy for Izuku, because in this timeline, I just don't see a world in which he takes the actual normal exam. Because come on now, the dude would easily be recommended into UA High, and through taking the entrance exam via recommendations, the test would be so much different. So much so that because I'm honestly not too sure what exactly the test entailed, I'm kind of going to be skipping this section. But let's just say that Izuku gets the best marks in every single category in every test. So with that said, Izuku would be placed into class 1A, and Izuku's first day of class would finally come around. As Izuku would get his things ready, this is when Inko would give Izuku a card and a note. She would tell Izuku that she had wrote this for him when she had discovered that Izuku would have a flight quirk. And she pretty much tells Izuku that when she discovered that, she always knew he was gonna become a hero, because at the end of the day, she knew that by raising her boy right, and with superhuman society evolving as it did, he was most likely gonna dream about being a hero. So whether he wanted to become one or not, she was gonna support him with her life. So Izuku reading this note would have a tear come down his face, as he would thank his mother for this and all the support that she's given him over the years, but Inko would stop him, saying that he's been the one giving her support. Ever since Izuku grew up, Izuku has literally been the one that's been making the money. He's been the one to make sure that she doesn't have to worry about taking 2 jobs and only has to worry about being his mother. She would give him the biggest and brightest hug and then a smile, as Izuku would be then dropped off by his mother his first day of school, and she would scream, "I love you, Izuku!" As Izuku would hear that, he would turn to his mother saying, "I love you too, Mom." This is when Izuku would begin making his way into the classroom, and this is when the first person to notice him would actually be Nejire Hado, who seeing Izuku would say, "Oh, it's you, superhero boy." Izuku looking to Nejire would ask, "And who are you?" She would go on to explain that her name is Nejire Hado, and she's one of UA's big 3. She would then go on to explain to Izuku that she's seen all about him over the news and the coverage, and how there's a cool, incredible new student that's going to be attending UA, someone who's blown All Might's records out of the water. Izuku would ruffle his hair going, "Yeah, it's not that impressive. I mean, it's not like I was fighting real villains, right? Just a bunch of dumb robots." She would say that it still was very impressive, and Izuku would thank her. After this, he would say, "So, mind showing me to my class?" She would then look at Izuku and say, "Oh, awesome, of course." And as Izuku would stare at Nejire, he would think, "Wow, she is so drop dead." But this is when she would say, "Here we are." And she would say, "Good luck, newbie?" This is when she would walk off, and as Izuku would take a sigh staring at her, he would then open this massive door standing in front of him as though it was nothing. You guys know how there's some doors that are so heavy that you have to put so much force in, you look goofy, and then there's some other ones where like you pull and yank, like you dang near like tug the whole thing? That's how Izuku would treat this massive door. And once Izuku would step inside, this is when Izuku would be welcomed to his new life. A life at UA High. As Izuku would step inside, this is when suddenly tons of the students would stand up going, "You're him! You're the recommendation student, aren't you? The one said to have had an incredible quirk, so great that you could already be a hero and you have a provisional hero license?" Izuku hearing this would have a nervous chuckle as he would go, "Yep, that's me." And as Izuku would stare at his classmates, he could see the names of their quirks above their head. Izuku would think, electricity, acid, creation, pop off, and all the way in the back, Izuku could see it. Explosions. Izuku seeing that would know that Bakugo's in his classroom. And though he didn't necessarily hate the guy, he knew that Bakugo had some sort of hate boner towards him. And it was kind of annoying having to deal with him all the time. Him trying to fight him and Izuku trying to pretty much play it off as though he didn't understand what's going on. It's irritating. So, as Izuku would make his way towards his desk, Bakugo would finally say something, going, "Oi Deku, heard you got in through recommendations, and now you're some sort of big shot. Well, don't let all that stuff get to your head, because I'm still gonna be #1, and I'm gonna crush you got me?" Izuku looking at Bakugo would give him a smile, going, "Oh, Katsuki, it's you. Been a long time, hasn't it?" Just completely ignoring what Kachan said. This one Kachan would go, "Don't ignore me, damn it!" As Izuku would sit down and laugh, telling him that he'd never dream of it. It is at this point that Izuku, hearing Aizawa ruffling up in the bag and seeing his quirk name above his head, Izuku would realize very quickly who this hero is, Eraserhead. As soon as he would order them what to do, this is when Uraraka would start saying, "But what about orientation?" But before she could even finish her sentence, Deku would step out and walk out of the room. Aizawa would say, "We're not taking that, and if I was you, I'd recommend following that kid's lead. He knows how to act." Deku at this point, making his way into the changing rooms, would start changing, and as Izuku would be standing there, he'd be having practically the perfect physique. He's buff, he's tall, he's just built like an actual Greek god. Deku is everything you could even imagine out of a superhero. And as Kirishima would stare at his ripped body, he would say, "Whoa, dude, it almost looks like you were carved out of stone or something like that. Your physique, it's incredible. It's perfect." Kaminari would come over towards Izuku and say, "Yeah, man, your body's off the charts crazy." And Izuku, kind of being touched by another dude while he's changing, would feel a bit awkward. He'd be like, "Thanks." At this point, he would change into his little, outfit that he's wearing, and the dude fills it in so well that it looks like it's compressor type clothes. Izuku would have to go one size up in the pants because the other one was, way too tight. It barely let his crotch breathe. So once that happened, he'd make his way outside, and Aizawa would toss a ball towards Katsuki Bakugo, who still, in this timeline, would be the #1 scorer in terms of the entrance exam, at least not the recommendation section. So, as Izuku would watch on to see what Bakugo can do and how much he's grown, he'd be impressed. He'd be like, "Wow, he's gotten a little bit stronger than even I had imagined." After this, everybody else would be told what the nature of this is for, and as Izuku would hear Aizawa telling them what's gonna happen and what the stakes are, Izuku would ready himself. Making his way towards the ball throw, he grips it as hard as he can, throwing the ball into outer space. This would stun everyone who goes, "What? He's that strong?" As Bakugo watching Deku's performance would be mouth agape. He's like, "How did he get stronger? I didn't think quirks were supposed to... There's no way." And as Izuku would smile towards the class, he'd say, "Did I do well?" Looking at Aizawa would show him a score of infinity before even Uraraka had gone. And as everybody would be staring at this, they'd all be so impressed. Suddenly, then would come the 50-meter dash, which Deku would clear in 0.1 second, shocking everyone in the class who's like, "We didn't even see him move." Izuku's speed was the equivalent of, "Wanna see me run up that hill? Wanna see me do it again?" That is literally how fast Izuku's moving. You couldn't even have seen it. And if it wasn't for the fact that the timer or stopwatch had tracked the a little monitor thing to the other side of the monitor, they would not have even registered it, and Aizawa's clicking speed would have limited how fast Deku actually was. Then would come the standing long jump, which Deku would just fly over, repeated side steps, which Izuku would use his incredible speed to pass, and then finally the grip shrink test. Deku would shatter the machine. As we would then get 3 more tests, one of them being punching power. Deku would shatter the machine, one created to tank blows from All Might himself, as they would then have a push-ups and sit-up contest. After this would all be over, Deku getting the best score in every single category, and yes, I do mean every category, would be at first in the class. Everybody absolutely stunned at all of Izuku's abilities. Some people would be like, "Dude, what can't you do?" And as Bakugo would be staring at Izuku, he'd just be like, How am I supposed to compete with this?" Also, quick side note, I just realized that my voice sounded less like Bakugo and more like Vegeta in that moment, so sorry about that. But anyways, after this would happen, people would gather around Deku and start crowding him, basically singing his praises and stuff like that. As after this would take place, All Might, after class would be over and everybody would begin going home, would actually go over towards Izuku, him wanting to ask him a question he had been dying to ask forever. He would then look towards Izuku as he would ask him to come have a private meeting with him. Deku, still being a massive fanboy of All Might, who still idolizes the guy, would practically be moving like stiff as though he has a cast on his full body. He'd be like, right, sure, All Might. As he would follow him and walking inside of a room, All Might would say, look kid, I'll cut to the chase. Your abilities are incredible, and I think that if you were to have even more power on top of that, you could be the most unstoppable hero in the world. I've seen the videos and I know who you work for, and I think that if you were to inherit my abilities, then you'd be the... But Izuku would stop him saying, you know, All Might, I didn't exactly want to believe it, but if what you're gonna try to offer me is some way of getting your power or some training, then honestly, All Might, I don't think I want it, or really, to put it bluntly, need it. All Might, my whole life I've been training my abilities, and I want to see just how far I can get with my own quirk. Plus, I think it'd be a better idea to, if you could train or potentially give your quirk, he'd raise an eyebrow, to give it to somebody who's quirkless. Give somebody else who doesn't have a chance at being a hero. Maybe somebody with a heroic heart? All Might hearing this would say, kid, you don't understand, it's... But Izuku would look at All Might, telling him that he promises to become a splendid hero. And hey, he'll even beat whoever his successor actually ends up being. All Might hearing this would have a smile as he would say, this kid, I can tell he's gonna be great. And as Izuku would stare at All Might after thanking him for the offer, he would walk off thinking, I can't believe I just said no. Damn it, why was I trying to look so cool back there? Well, it is what it is. Guess it can't be helped. After this, Izuku would make his way home, getting some grub from his mother, as the very next day of school would come around, and we would begin the battle trial arc. Immediately kicking our story off where we had left off, Izuku would be in class answering his classmates' questions, with people crowding around him asking him what it's like to have so many quirks. At hearing this, Todoroki in the back of the classroom would say that it's not all that. He also has multiple quirks, but as they would continue to name off the abilities that Izuku has and he proceeds to answer more and more questions, Izuku would start revealing that he has even more powers. He would say, well, the extent of my quirk from what I know is flight, super strength, super speed, invisibility, invulnerability, regeneration, freeze breath, x-ray, and I can also tell what people's quirks are just by looking at them. As Izuku would explain this, the class would be like, what? You have that many quirks? That's insane! How do you even control all of them? What's the backlash? Izuku sitting there would begin to actually bite on his nails as he would think, backlash? I don't think I actually have one. I mean, unless invulnerability counts, because if I was to go to the doctor, there's no way they could even heal me with medical tools. They would be like, what? That's your weakness? And as Izuku's sitting there just kind of like, is that a bad thing? This is when they would start getting even more crazy around him, and the girls in class 1A would be like, it must be so awesome to have a quirk like this. As Izuku would chuckle, and his eyes would suddenly lock on with All Might. Above his head, it would say, one for all. And as Izuku would stare at All Might, Izuku would be like, All Might, it's you. But everybody is still crowded around Deku, with some people noticing All Might and just kind of waving at him as they go back to fangirling about Izuku, who's in their classroom. All Might is just kind of sitting there like, I am here. As the class would continue to ignore All Might, and he would stare at Izuku with a little bit of a jealous and just confused expression. It's at this point that All Might would think to himself, well, the young man is very popular, and he is very strong. It's at this point that he'd go, class, can I get your attention? This is when everybody would finally turn to All Might, and he would go on to explain today what they're going to be doing, with someone finally asking the big question. What are you doing here, All Might? All Might at this point would smile as he would say, I'm gonna be one of your homeroom teachers, and I'm gonna be responsible for training you guys into the best heroes you can be. It's at this point that Izuku, looking at All Might, would give him a smile, and the two would lock eyes as All Might would smile back at him. After this, he would go on to explain what's gonna go on today, how Aizawa's not gonna be involved, and reveal to them their hero costumes. Once this would all be over, the class would finally settle down, and they would all suit up into their new hero gear. It's at this point that all of them would begin to be explained to them how today's event's gonna work, and All Might would pretty much tell them that it's gonna be simple. They're gonna cast lots and go against each other in 2v2 battles. He'd preface this by telling them not to go too far with their quirks, that this is only training. So as everybody would begin pulling out their lots, people would begin hoping that they could get partnered up with Deku, that it's an easy pass. However, there's two people in the classroom who don't exactly feel the same, and those two would consist of Bakugo and Todoroki, who feels like his thunder is kind of being stolen. Not that he likes being in the spotlight, but just the fact that everybody else has already considered Izuku better than him is kind of rubbing Todoroki off the wrong way. So, as soon as this would start, Todoroki and Bakugo would reveal their lots. The both of them got paired up together. Todoroki would stare at Bakugo unsure of how he feels being paired up with him, and Bakugo would stare at Todoroki saying, "Just don't get in my way, you half and half bastard." It's at this point that we would get Deku being paired up with Uraraka, and she'd be like, "Whoa, I got paired up with Mr. Superhero." Oh, and by the way, for some of you that might be wondering, yo, what happened with Uraraka during the entrance exam? Well, I figure that there's no way that students actually die in those tests, so there has to be some sort of off and on switch that Nezu could probably press. Plus, if that isn't the case, I can definitely see a pro hero stepping in and saving her instead. But regardless of what option you want to take, she's fine. Anyways though, once this would happen, Izuku and Uraraka would introduce themselves to each other, and after Izuku finds out about Uraraka's gravity quirk, he's like, "What? You have a gravity quirk? That is awesome! I wish I could have one of those quirks." And Uraraka hearing that would be like, "Yeah, quirks, right." But regardless, as soon as the event would begin, Izuku and Uraraka inside of the room would begin to look around, and as Izuku would use his X-ray vision to spot the bomb and the location of his opponents, Izuku notices that one of them was about to use their quirk, half hot, half cold. Izuku, instantly picking Uraraka up in his arms like a lady in distress, would fly up in the air, begin hovering above the ground, and she'd say, is this necessary?" As Izuku would stare at her, telling her that this is a hero's job. It's their responsibility to protect a pretty lady in distress. And so as Uraraka would pretty much be inside of Deku's arm and muscular body, she would just start like blushing like crazy, all the while Deku could see ice begin to form around the entirety of the room, Izuku knowing that Todoroki was gonna pull something like that. However, it's at this moment that Deku could see a silhouette of Bakugo probably barking at the direction of Todoroki. As Izuku, being curious as to what Bakugo's saying, he would begin using his super hearing. This is when he would hear Bakugo go, "Hey, you damn half and half bastard! You ended up freezing the place! My quirk isn't gonna be as effective with all this ice around!" And Todoroki would stare at Bakugo saying that's not his problem, that the two of them have probably already been captured. And so Todoroki would begin walking down, going to see if he can find them, seeing as he's convinced that either Deku or Uraraka was frozen in his ice. However, Deku, being the smarter of the two of them, would literally tell Uraraka that they're gonna go out the window. So flying right out of it and hearing glass cracking, Bakugo would remain in the room knowing that Deku is probably going to go straight there. So as Todoroki would have left the room in search of Izuku and Uraraka, Bakugo would stay up there thinking to himself that he can't wait to tear Deku a new one, that he's going to show him the fruits of his training and prove to everybody that Deku's not that special. But it'd be at this point that Deku and Uraraka would come crashing through a window, as coming face to face with Bakugo, Bakugo would smirk, shooting an explosion towards the direction of Deku, using a weaker version of howitzer impact. It's at this point that Deku would catch Bakugo's arm with one hand and then fling him towards the other side of the room. Then as Bakugo would try to shoot explosions towards him, Deku would counter them easily with a super breath, simply going as Bakugo's explosions would be completely stopped, and Bakugo could feel himself being frozen to the wall. Bakugo, in this moment feeling pissed, would say, "Don't underestimate me!" But as he would get himself free from the ice, it's at this point that Uraraka, having walked over to the bomb, would begin placing her hand on it. And so, as Todoroki would have realized what had gone down, he would be just a half a step too late, and the hero team would win. All Might would announce the results, and as everybody would watch, they'd be like, "Whoa, he just took down two of the most powerful people in the class, right? I mean, on paper they should be, right?" Suyu would say. The class would begin talking over this, but as Izuku would walk in the room, everybody would instantly be like, "Yeah, no, he's definitely the strongest." And so Izuku, going over towards the boys, would begin talking to them as they begin singing his praises. And as this would take place, Izuku could only sit there with a smile on his face going, "You guys, it's not that cool." To which Mineta would go, "Not that cool? Not that cool? You just saved the damsel in distress. How nice did it feel to hold her in your arms?" Izuku would look at Mineta going, "You're a weirdo, aren't you?" As the day would be over, and then we would get the next big event that we have to cover, the USJ arc. This would all start off with everybody in the bus, and Izuku being crowded by Mina and Uraraka, who, has established a good friendship with Izuku. We have Invisible Girl there and Suyu. Like, all the girls are near Izuku, and they're all trying to talk to him about how cool his quirk is. We would even have some of the guys who are not ashamed to admit that they think he's the coolest, like Kirishima and Kaminari. Mineta would be there just because the girls are around. Meanwhile, we have Todoroki and Bakugo towards the front of the bus as they're just staring at each other, both envious of Deku's praises and how everybody just thinks that he's so much better than them. They'd be pissed. The two of them would be staring at each other with an agreement of, yeah, we're gonna crush him. But unfortunately for them, that little dream of theirs is probably not going to become a reality. But anyways, eventually the class would arrive, and it's at this point that the Hero 13 would start to give out her very boring speech. Then suddenly, Kurogiri would warp gate into the arena as Izuku would stare at him and read the quirk Warp Gate. It's at this point that Izuku, turning towards Aizawa, would question why he's here, thinking that this must be some sort of villain exercise. But as Aizawa would jump down towards the massive bundle of villains, Izuku would realize that this is not a game. This is real. So, with a slight smile cracking on Deku's face, him trying to hide it, Deku would use his super breath to shoot Kurogiri away, not giving him the chance to even use his warp gate quirk on the rest of the students. Deku at this point would fly up into the air, as using his heat vision, he would shoot it towards the direction of some villains that were currently trying to fight Aizawa. He would take down a grand total of 4 villains helping him out, as suddenly, Kurogiri, having recovered, would end up trying to warp gate Deku away. However, Deku would be so incredibly fast that he would only be sitting there trying to warp gate an after image, as Izuku would go flying at Kurogiri and punch straight into the metal thing that Kurogiri had, his only weakness. After this, he would leave Kurogiri unconscious, as Izuku would float in the air, kind of like Superman does, with everybody watching him, and Shigaraki saying, "Nomu, kill the brat. Let's show this hero that he's not as strong as he thinks he is." It's at this point that the Nomu would lunge to the direction of Deku in the air, reeling its fist back, going to punch Izuku, and as the punch would land, Deku would simply stare at the Nomu with a bored expression, thinking, "I had hoped you were better than this." It's at this point that we would cut to Shigaraki watching the punch land, as he would think, "Finally, now that little brat's gonna finally come off his high horse." But Izuku, simply standing there, having seemed to take 0 damage, would look back at the Nomu, grabbing its arm and keeping it floating above. The Nomu trying to gash and punch at Izuku, but none of the blows would do a thing to him. Suddenly, Deku would uppercut the Nomu into the sky, disappearing, as in Superman fashion, you could just hear a sonic boom. Deku flies into the air and begins pummeling the Nomu, eventually dropping an elbow on it, sending it crashing into the USJ. The wind pressure of this would blow through the entire place, sending a massive amount of wind and air flying throughout it. And as Izuku would land on the Nomu, Deku would land dropping both knees on its gut, as he would then grab the Nomu by the head and start using his laser vision to shoot it straight into the Nomu's eyes and brain. The Nomu in this moment would start screeching, and Izuku would have a smile on his face, as a more sadistic side of Deku would be revealed, and it would be shown that he actually loves a good fight, even though he can never have one. But as everybody would watch on, Class 1A I mean, they would be stunned. The Nomu would be on the ground as its arms and limbs and stuff like that would stop regenerating, and Izuku would get up, looking towards the direction of Shigaraki, as he could read the quirk, Decay. Izuku, seeing that, looking towards Shigaraki, would say, "You got a pretty interesting quirk. Too bad you're going to be spending your life in prison for the foreseeable future." Shigaraki, looking at Izuku, would say, You're a monster." As he would try to decay Izuku, however, Izuku, just completely dodging the attack, would then gut punch Shigaraki, as a bruise would be placed on his stomach the size of Deku's fist. He'd practically indent it in. Izuku in this moment would whisper something to Shigaraki before he passes out of consciousness, and as he would be kind of in and out of that state, Shigaraki would hear Izuku tell him that if he ever tries to attack UA, he's dead. It's at this point that Shigaraki, falling into full unconsciousness, would fall to the ground, and every single one of the rest of the villains remaining would then be gathered by Izuku, who, using supersonic speeds as time would seem to slow down, Deku would defeat all of the rest of the villains before Aizawa even had the chance to speak up against Deku, similar to the Metro Man scene that we get inside of the Megamind movie, where he has an internal crisis as Megamind's fire, he's doing that whole scene. But anyways, with that being the case, Aizawa would walk over towards Izuku as time would finally go back to normal, and he would ask Izuku just how strong he truly is. Izuku would tell Aizawa that he's pretty strong, as he would then pretty much tell Aizawa that the rest of the villains have already been rounded up. Aizawa would say, "What? But you just finished here." And Izuku would say, "I used my super speed to round them all up. Hope that's not a problem." Aizawa, being stunned at the fact that he moved so fast that by the time that he had gotten the chance to walk over towards him, the rest of the villains were handled as well. Aizawa, staring at Izuku, would think, "I guess we ought to be lucky that he's not on the villain side, because if he was, I don't think there's even a prayer that could keep us from all being destroyed." It's at this point that Aizawa, staring at Deku's back, would then wonder if All Might could potentially pose some sort of threat to Izuku. But unfortunately for the heroes, he's not going to be doing a thing to Izuku either. It's at this point that the USJ incident would go live, with the news pretty much reporting that All Might and the heroes had handled the entire situation, not wanting an entire news break happening where everybody finds out the truth. So after this would all be over, Izuku would kind of be laying in his own room reading some manga comics, as he would then take a deep sigh and go, "When am I ever gonna get to have a fight incredible like this against a villain who can actually pose a threat to me? This is so boring. Being a hero is cool and all, but come on now. Is it too much for a guy to ask for an exhilarating fight?" Izuku at this point would hear a knock at his door, as it would be Inko bringing him a couple of snacks. She would ask Izuku how he's feeling, and Izuku would just have a big bright smile, saying that he's feeling awesome. She would ask Izuku how he would feel about going out to eat later on today, and he's like, "Sure, where are we going?" And it's at this point that she'd say, "Your favorite, fish and chips." Izuku's like, "What? Yeah, let's go. As this is when we would get a scene of Izuku in their car and going off to go, eating some food and stuff like that. After this, the screen would kind of fade to black, and we would then cut into all of the students in Class 1A having been informed about the activities of the UA Sports Festival. People would be like, "What? The UA Sports Festival? That's really happening? Even with the villain attack?" Aizawa would say, "Yeah, of course it is. This year we figure that even if a villain attack, if you could even call it that, happened, we should be fine, especially since Izuku's gonna be there." He would then sing praises to Izuku for a second, with everybody being like, "Yeah, you're right. Izuku handled that threat like a boss. None of us could even do a thing about it, but he came in there and defeated everybody." It's at this point that Aizawa would nod, saying that they don't even know the half of it. Izuku had defeated all the other villains before anybody even had a chance to try to stand up to him. And so, with that being said, the students would all be super hyped, as the rest of the classrooms would be standing outside of their doorway, and as Izuku would use his x-ray vision, he would know exactly what's gonna happen. So, using his super speed, Deku would grab his binder and his things, as he'd put it into his backpack and walk past the crowd without them even realizing what had happened. Some people seeing Izuku behind them would say, "What? There's a student in 1A that has a teleport quirk?" But nobody realizing what had truly happened, that Izuku didn't teleport, but straight up just ran by them, they'd all be stunned. Some of them would realize that that had to be what happened, because they could feel a gentle breeze go by them when Izuku had appeared behind them. So, with that said, we would finally then cut to a scene where every single student going to UA, obviously in their first year, would be setting up for the race. It's at this point that we could see Izuku doing a couple of toe touches, as President Mike would finally say, "And now, we're gonna be beginning the hero race." It's at this point that Midnight would go on to pretty much announce that the race had begun, and the second this would happen, Izuku could see Todoroki about to use his ice quirk to freeze everyone in place. So, Izuku would just let it happen, deciding that it's a cool opportunity to show off. So as his legs would be frozen solid, Deku would snap right out of it, flying right next to Todoroki at equal pace, not going full throttle, simply to make this a bit more entertaining for the fans. And Bakugo would come in shortly after, going, "Don't forget about me, damn it!" blowing explosions. I'm about to catch up to you, Deku. He would then see Izuku's, right next to them. He's like neck and neck with the both of them. And as Todoroki would freeze the 0-pointer, Deku would fly towards one as he would punch it into the stratosphere. Everybody watching as a chain reaction of the explosion would happen mid-air, the punch being so fast that the robot would already be basically in space before it had fully exploded. And you could just kind of see like a firework display in the sky as Izuku would continue flying next to Todoroki and Bakugo. Everybody having seen that would lose their minds. It's like, what? He's that strong? As we would then get some questioning whether this kid is even stronger than All Might. People being like, no, there's no way, right? There's no way that anybody could be stronger than the symbol of peace. But as President Mike would begin hyping Deku up, saying that he's the brightest prospect in UA, even more so than the son of the number 2 hero Endeavor, Todoroki would kind of be like, whatever. As the race would continue, and Izuku trying to keep up with Todoroki and Bakugo to make it look like a close race, would finally make it to the mine section. It's at this point that Izuku, using his laser vision and x-ray vision in tandem, would blow each and every single one of them up behind him, as the path to get to the actual finish line would be clouded with smoke and dust, and Todoroki and Bakugo would do their best to avoid that. However, by the time that they would clear that section, Izuku would already be at the finish line, with President Mike freaking out. Whoa, with incredible speed, Izuku managed to clear the remainder of the test like it was nothing! Everybody would start cheering for Deku and the crowd would go nuts, as after this would take place, we would get the cavalry battles, which I'm going to skip, and then we would get the 1v1 fights, Shinso versus Deku. As Izuku would step onto the ring, he would look at Shinso as he would say, interesting, so you've got a brainwash quirk. Shinso in this moment would go, what? How did you know that? But Izuku would simply stay quiet, not answering his question. Shinso would think to himself, dang it, did he figure me out already? And Izuku in his mind would think it's an interesting quirk and it probably would have worked if I didn't have this quirk. He would then go on to read the information about Shinso's quirk, how it works via getting somebody to talk to him in his mind, with Izuku walking slowly towards Shinso. Shinso in this moment freaking out would try to hit Deku in this moment, however, Deku not taking any impact from that blow, and that punch actually hurting Shinso's hand, Deku would simply apologize to Shinso for what's about to happen next. Shinso going, what? What are you talking about? But before Shinso could even finish his thought, he would be sent flying back into the grass by Izuku's super breath, as some bits and pieces of ice shards would be on Shinso's skin. It looks like he had taken a chicken out to defrost, but as Shinso would find himself on the grass looking up at the sky, he would think, the difference between our powers, it's horrifying. He would in his mind conjure up an image of Deku on the top of a mountain and even higher than that, flying above it all, as Shinso would be on the ground looking up as nothing but a mere citizen. It's at this point that Deku smiles to Shinso and tells him maybe he'll have better luck next time. It's at this point that the crowd would go wild at them saying, what? Even more quirks? And President Mike would start to explain that Izuku Midoriya is their biggest and brightest student because he has multiple quirks. The crowd would go absolutely nuts with them begging for another fight from Izuku instantly, but President Mike would say that they're gonna have to watch the rest of the students, and the crowd would just be like, come on, we want more Izuku, because they're just like you guys and they want to see a part 3. Immediately cutting back into the sports festival, we would then cut to the Todoroki versus Tape Boy fight, and when Todoroki would shoot his massive ice glacier attack, instead of having the crazy reactions that we would have had in the original, people would be like, whoa, that's pretty cool too, I guess. And even with that massive iceberg that is practically nearly touching the people in the arena, they would all still kind of be underwhelmed, considering the fact that they had just seen some kid possess the powers of a literal Greek god in their world. It's insane. But anyways, after all the rest of the matches would finally be over, Deku would find himself in the second round going up against Todoroki. And with the crowd finding this out, they would all lose it. They're like, what? The son of the number 2 hero and Izuku were going at it? They would start going crazy, with everybody in the stands being told to remain seated and not to stand up for any reasons. Also, to be very careful considering the two combatants that are going up against each other. They would also tell the crowd that this one might get a little dangerous, so sorry ahead of time. Izuku in this moment, now staring down at Todoroki as he'd be levitating in front of him, would ask him how exactly he wants to do this. Todoroki staring at him with anger in his eyes as he would think to himself that he was gonna bring Izuku down a peg or two, but the second that the match would begin and Todoroki would shoot an ice glacier towards Deku's direction, Deku standing there would simply tank the attack, with everybody watching him in the ice going, "What? Is that it? He got taken out by one ice attack?" But suddenly, the ice would start to shatter, as Deku would then fly out of it and aim his laser vision to the direction of Todoroki. This heat beam would go flying towards him as he would create a protection of ice, but it would melt right through it, with a smile appearing on Izuku. As the beam would get closer and closer to Todoroki, Todoroki would start realizing that he's pushing him off the arena, but right before it would make contact with him and ultimately give him 4th degree burns, the beam would completely stop. Izuku then breathing in, shooting a massive wind attack towards the direction of Todoroki as it would nearly throw him off the arena. The only reason it's not is because Todoroki would have actually used his ice to create a cushion for himself. The ice itself, however, would start shattering, and it's at this point that Izuku would smile. He would then fly towards the direction of Todoroki before throwing him into the stratosphere, flying off towards him with a sonic boom, leaving wind shooting throughout the stadium, as Izuku, now right face to face with Todoroki, grabbing him by the collar, would tell him that it's not quite yet time for this battle to be over, as he would then pretty much fly with Todoroki behind him at super high speeds, which Todoroki would actually take damage from this, considering that he had to keep his eyes closed the whole time, because the wind pressure was actually affecting his skin, with the wind pressure hitting him in this moment, causing him to look like he's inside of a fighter jet. You know those clips that go viral where like the people inside of the jets, like their faces look like super old because of the way that their skin is kind of like bending? That's what's happening to Todoroki, and as they're flying through the air higher and higher, Deku would finally end up holding Todoroki with one arm, asking if he's had enough. Todoroki, staring at Deku with anger in his eyes, would then burn him on his arm. However, as Izuku would stand there tanking the blast of fire that would engulf the area, Izuku would stand there without a single scratch. Not even his costume had been injured by that. Izuku then would smile at Todoroki and say, "Good match," as he would then fly down towards the direction of the earth, so unbelievably fast, grabbing Todoroki by the collar, as Todoroki and Izuku would lock eyes, and Todoroki would feel real fear in this moment. He would think to himself that he's about to fall thousands and thousands of feet from the air, but right before he would touch the ground, Izuku would stop, causing all of Todoroki's internal system to just go into shock, because he had just been going from like the highest possible speed to just an instant stop. His brain had gotten rattled, and he would place Todoroki on the ground gently. After doing so, he would then lift his arms as everybody starts pretty much praising him a little bit, as Izuku would ball his fist up and go, "All right!" He would then punch at the air as it would create double the force of what All Might's punches can do, and he would proceed to change the weather. A bit of rain would start to actually hit the arena, and this would actually impact a bit of the next couple of fights. However, since Izuku wasn't really part of them, nobody really cared, and getting wet didn't even matter to anybody, considering the fact that they were witnessing Izuku Midoriya, the greatest hero prospect that's ever existed. Eventually, every single match would be over, leading to Bakugo and Izuku inside of the ring after having defeated Todoroki, since his third match against Ida had been cancelled because Ida left the arena due to Ingenium. That said, however, with this being the case, Deku and Bakugo would both find themselves in the arena, and Bakugo would start trash talking Deku, telling him not to hold anything back, you hear? Izuku, hearing this, would smile as the battle would begin, and Izuku, blitzing to the direction of Bakugo, would go to throw one of his hardest punches, stopping just short before it could actually hit Bakugo in the face, and creating a wind force so strong that people in the seats nearly got blown back, if not for Cementos creating a wall of stone to protect them. It's at this point that Deku, looking at Bakugo, would then smirk, to which Bakugo in this moment would grit his teeth going, "Damn you, Deku! You think you can make a fool of me?" He would start trembling, not realizing it, as Izuku, flying up into the air, seeing the clouds begin to form, would literally proceed to grab a thunderbolt straight out of the air, grabbing it as he would then throw it at the direction of Bakugo, and this thunderbolt would have turned white, having been converted into energy by Izuku's arm and then thrown with the other. It was absolutely insane. The dude was performing what the Flash does, basically. Throwing this lightning bolt at Bakugo, this would completely stop his heart for a moment as he would fall out of the arena unconscious and then suddenly be woken up with a jolt of energy. Deku placing his hand on his chest and waking him back up by powering a bit of energy throughout his body. This would shock Bakugo awake like they do in the hospitals as he would look at Izuku and get his hand away from his face. Deku, however, would just smile and wave, and as the medals would be awarded and Deku would receive first place, the crowd would go bonkers. Izuku being told by All Might that he expects great things from him, and Izuku nodding, telling him that that's exactly what he plans to do. It's at this point that Deku proceeding to go to the waiting area to get changed into his normal clothes to go meet up with his mom who's in the stands, would then proceed to get a text, or an email more specifically, by the company that sponsors him. They would pretty much give him an email informing him that they would love to recruit him for once his hero career actually starts, stating that the previous contract that they had gave them a clause to be the first people to recruit Izuku, and after seeing that performance, they're positive more people are gonna go after him. They would offer Izuku a massive amount of money if he would agree to them now without looking at any other offers. But Izuku, seeing this message, would simply smirk, thinking to himself that there's no way he's gonna take this offer, knowing how much better he can get out there. From here, Izuku would smile, putting his phone in his pocket, as suddenly Uraraka, walking in the room, would say, "Hey Izuku, that was incredible out there. You threw punches, you flew," and she starts pretty much acting as though she's doing all that stuff. Suddenly the rest of his classmates barge in, they're like, "Dude, you're the best." Everyone with the exception of Todoroki, Bakugo, and of course Ida. They would all start glazing Izuku as he's sitting there, would start to pretty much be like, "You guys, like, you don't have to tell me how great I am all the time, you know?" But everyone's just like, "Dude, like, we can't even help it." But Izuku's just kind of like looking at them and he's like, yeah, whatever. As he would then finish putting his shirt on, which the girls, having stared at Izuku's body prior to that, would all be kind of blushing. Deku in this moment would then tell them that he has to go. He has a little bit of a date planned on today. The girls would be like, "What? You're going on a date?" And Izuku's like, "Yeah, my mom, she invited me out to eat. Catch you later." It's at this point that he would leave and all the girls would be like, "Oh, good, it's just that." As we would then get a bit of a filler chapter where Izuku and his mom are going out to eat and stuff like that. Maybe like a little villain attack could happen while they were like out eating and something like that, and Izuku could use his super speed to take the villain out. It'd be kind of cool considering that Izuku would literally be about to take a bite of the whatever food he is eating. And for this point, I want to say sushi because he's from Japan, so he probably likes it. And as he's eating it, Izuku could see from the corner of his eye that a villain was about to crush a baby carriage. So Izuku, tapping into his top speed, would practically make the world freeze around him. As flying over to the direction of this villain, he would smash it into the ground, taking the baby carriage and putting it right next to the mother, as he would send them flying about, like a street away. It's at this point that everybody seeing what had happened would be like, "Oh no, he's about to," but then it just all goes silent, like, what happened to the villain? They're all just staring at it and it has his face clobbered. Meanwhile, Izuku's finishing taking the bite of his food, and Inko would be like, "Izuku, did you do that?" Izuku just looks at her and chuckles a little bit, saying, "Sure did, Mom. Guess my quirk's getting even stronger." Inko would then look at her son and be like, "Wow, it really is. How did you do that?" Izuku would go on to explain what the heck he just did, and she's just like, "That's scary. I don't think anybody should be able to move that fast, Izuku." But Izuku's like, "Yeah, I don't think so either, but if it works, right? At least I'm on the hero's side." Inko would start to chuckle, saying, "Yeah, definitely," as she wouldn't be able to help kind of being scared of her son. But as soon as these thoughts would start to flood her mind, she'd be like, "No, what am I thinking? This is my Izuku I'm talking about. He's a sweetheart. He'd never hurt a fly. Yeah, I've raised him right." As Izuku would suddenly say, "You know, Mom, you don't have to worry about me turning evil." It's at this point that Inko would say, What are you talking about?" As Izuku would point to his ears, saying that he has super hearing, remember? He would then go on to explain that his ability probably evolved or something like that. And now, instead of just hearing very, very intricate sounds and things that he wants to listen to, he can probably also hear thoughts. She would be like, "That's incredible," as her mind would start racing, but then suddenly we would get Izuku standing behind her, as he would then give her a hug, and he would pretty much tell her, "Mom, I will never turn into a villain." As Inko would feel her son hugging her, she would then see the image of a young baby Izuku who was flying with a big smile on his face, just kind of like zipping around through the air. Remembering all this would calm her mind immediately, as she would say, "You're right, Izuku. I'm sorry I even thought that. I can't believe that I did that. You must think I'm a horrible mother." But Izuku would say, "Stop right there. I would never think that, not even in my wildest dreams," as we would now cut to the very next day at UA. Because to be completely transparent with you guys, I didn't even think about that scene until just now when I decided I'd give him another power. But anyways, cutting back to the classroom, everybody in class 1A would look to the front of the class as the pro hero Midnight would walk in the room and pretty much tell them all that today they're all going to be picking their hero names. So everybody would get super excited for this, and Midnight would start approving or disapproving certain names. Izuku at this point, making his way towards the front of the class, would hold out his little thing, with his name being the do-it-all hero, Zeus. Having chosen that name thanks to the fact that people in the stadium had actually started calling him that, with somebody coming up with that and pretty much the tweet going completely viral. Deku unironically was named by the people, and that's kind of cool. So once this would all be over and they would all start talking about their hero internships, Deku would have been flooded by practically every single hero agency in the world, with the only few people that wouldn't try to get him would probably be very, very small agencies, just because they know he probably won't choose them. So Izuku, looking at this list, would be overwhelmed, seeing each and every single one of the top heroes, with the exception of All Might, because it's not like he can exactly train him on much. So with that said, Izuku, looking over this list, would realize that he's probably going to have this chosen by his agency. He would send them the list, and they would quickly send him a text back saying what agency he's going to go with. Then the rest of his classmates would say, "Izuku, what agencies did you get a request from?" And Izuku would show them the list that pretty much was unending. They'd be like, "What? Izuku got that many internship requests?" They're like, "It's practically all of Japan. In fact, some of the US even has you here." Izuku would start smiling as everybody's just like, "That's incredible." But as Izuku would check his phone to see who exactly he's going to go intern with, this is when he would see that the person that they chose was the #1 hero in America, Star in Stripes. Izuku, reading that, would be kind of stunned that they decided to send him out somewhere else, with the agency pretty much telling him that the reason they did this was to show off his potential even in America, just like All Might would have done so in his younger days. Izuku would be like, "Huh, that's actually pretty smart." So for the entirety of Izuku's internship, he would actually spend his time in America, meaning that unfortunately for Ida, he was probably gonna be dying or being paralyzed. And whichever you really want to go with, it kind of sucks either way. But we're gonna be going with the death option, because Stain did kind of say that he was gonna be killing Ida if nobody came to help, so yeah, we're gonna go with that. Anyways, as Izuku would be abroad, he would suddenly receive a text message from Aizawa informing him that he's sorry to tell him, but their class rep Ida was killed by the hero killer. Izuku, hearing this, would stare at his phone in utter shock, reminiscing back to everything that's happened leading to this. Him flying to this agency because it would have just been faster than anything else. Him arriving and meeting Star and meeting her comrades and the agency and being shown the ropes about how hero works actually goes down. And then he would even remember some of the battles that he's had with Star and Stripes, her wanting to actually spar with the kid, knowing that he has what it takes, and him literally defeating Star and Stripes, who has one of the most busted abilities in the entire series, who unfortunately was still unable to compete with Izuku's superhero quirk. Him moving so fast that before Star could even perceive it, he had already practically defeated her. The dude practically had the O-Clock quirk from the My Hero Vigilante series, which, speaking of, if you guys haven't seen that anime yet, you have to. It's literally a must-watch type thing. It's incredible. I cannot sing the series praise enough. I have loved every volume that I've been reading of it, and I actually have the physical copies because my girlfriend got them for me. So it's the first manga that I've ever read, and before recording this, I actually had read chapters 5 and 6, or actually not chapters, but volumes. But that's besides the point. Anyways, Star, looking at Izuku and seeing that his face expression had changed, would grab him on his shoulder saying, "What's wrong, kid? You look a little down there." Izuku, then staring at Star, would say that her classmate has just died during his internship. She would then pretty much hug him and say that she's sorry to hear that. He would then tell her that it was the hero killer. As Star, staring at Deku, would say, "What are you planning on doing?" Knowing that Izuku has not only the desire to go after the hero killer now, but the ability to. And so Izuku, looking at her with these eyes of like, "I'm gonna destroy him," would then tell Izuku, "Come with me." It's at this point that she would go on to pretty much show Izuku one of her memorabilia that would be in her office. And as she would do this, she would go on to explain to Izuku that a long time ago, one of her best friends was actually killed on duty, and that she made the horrific mistake of actually taking things too far. The villain responsible for this is now brain dead and in the hospital, and it's all her fault. And come to find out, the guy wasn't even as much of a villain as it seemed. Apparently, the guy was trying to rob the place to feed his dying children and his family that was starving. She would go on to explain that if she had known the reason for how things had actually went down, maybe she wouldn't have blown a fuse, but just being completely unconsolable, it just didn't help. And as Izuku would hear that, he would then stare at Star as she would say, "Look kid, if you want to go after the hero killer, we're gonna do it by the book, and I'm gonna be right by your side." Izuku then looking at Star would say, "Do you mean it?" As Star would say, "Of course I did, kid. After all, who's gonna stop you if you really want to go take out the hero killer? Plus, it's about time I stretched my legs for the day, don't you think?" Izuku at this point would smile at Star as he would grab her and fly towards the direction of Hosu City. They would arrive in mere moments, and once they would land, it would be nighttime. So Star and Izuku would both go from different alley and alley checking for the hero killer. However, due to Izuku's incredible strength and ability to speed around so fast that time seems to be moving slow, while Star was literally flying in the air about to check the first alleyway, Deku had already found the hero killer and would be standing face to face with him. It's at this point that he would click a button alerting Star to his actual location, as he would say, "So, you're the hero killer." "Yeah, who's asking?" Stain would say, as he would lick his blade, and Izuku looking at him would say, "You're the scum responsible for killing Ida and Ingenium. I hope you've written your will down, because you're not making it out of here without a few broken bones." It's at this point that Star would arrive right next to Izuku, as Stain would be shocked. "Star and Stripe? Interesting. You plan to get revenge, fake hero?" He would lick his blade, as Izuku hearing that moniker would wonder what the heck he's on about. It's at this point that he would read his thoughts, and he would begin hearing all of what Stain was thinking, how he was going to lunge towards them with his blade, catch them off guard with his blood curdle quirk, and then kill the both of them for being false heroes. Izuku, wondering what the heck a false hero is, would say, "What's a false hero?" And in that instant, Stain's blade would leave his hand, flying to the direction of Izuku, who in this moment, reading Stain's racing thoughts, would catch the blade mid-air, saying he's not going to repeat himself. Stain, now standing still, understanding the predicament he's in, would smile at the boy, saying, "So you were a fast one." As Izuku would speed blitz towards him, punching him square in his stomach so hard that Stain starts vomiting on the ground, with Izuku whispering in his ear, "And a strong one." Stain in this moment would stare up at Izuku, calling him a fake hero, as he would then tell him that he has no right to use his quirk like that. It's at this point that Stain would leap backwards and would start thinking about what has led him to this moment, realizing that he's most likely not going to get out of here. Star, using her quirk, would actually cause Stain to be completely unable to leave a prison of air she would create, using one of her laws or quirks or however it is her power works. And now, Izuku would be left standing in front of Stain, reading his mind and seeing all the things that are coursing through it. Izuku would think, "It's sickening." And at this point, the police and authorities would arrive. Stain would then be thrown into a police van, as he would be taken off to the police authorities, where he would ultimately be drugged up and pretty much placed under custody in Tartarus. It's at this point that Izuku, looking at Star, would thank her, as news coverage would cover the incident of the hero Star in Stripes from America coming over to Japan to handle the hero killer. And just like you would expect from the media, they eventually end up finding out that Izuku was actually with her during that time. So this goes viral, and people start talking about how it was probably the kid who defeated Stain, seeing as he has such an incredible quirk, and they did hear talks about one of his classmates being taken out. This would go crazy in public eye, and UA would start to have more than just a few questions their way. Why did one of your students get killed? Why is UA allowing their students into the field so early on? UA would actually get into a bit of trouble thanks to Izuku, but after everything would finally blow away and the students would return to class, everybody would kind of have a bit of a somber tone, because now their class rep was dead and UA was under a lot of scrutiny. However, there's a lot of people in the media supporting what Izuku did, saying that it was incredible and that the hero Star and Stripes acts as a true, genuine hero. Instead of allowing the kid to go through with something that would probably make him somewhat of a vigilante, she came and helped the boy to do things by the book. This eventually would help things blow over, and after a bit of time, the students would all be told about the pro hero final exams and yada yada yada. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, since this is the final part of the story and I'm most likely gonna upload this as a movie, I just quickly wanted to thank you guys for the fact that you've supported this series as well as you have. Genuinely, I just cannot remember the last time that one of my videos did so well, that so many of you guys liked the video, even hit the like goal on part 2, and dang near hit the like goal on part 3. It's actually insane. So thank you guys so much for this, and I know you guys love this series so much, so I'm gonna do my best right now to make sure that I give you guys an absolute banger for the end. So if you guys go on to enjoy the rest of the video, then please leave a like on it, seeing as it's probably going to help this one do so much better, and that would just absolutely make my day, seeing as your boy kind of needs these vids to do pretty well to kind of, eat. Anyways though, jumping back into the story, Izuku would be told about the final exams, and because he's so incredibly smart that he has some sort of strange quirk in his head called overdrive, it pretty much allows him to think while time has stopped. Like, he's able to think similarly to the Flash, as if everything is moving in slow motion. That's the thing that pretty much allows Izuku to move as fast and do things the way that he can. If he was able to just move as fast as he is all of the time, whenever he's using his superpowers, Izuku's brain would literally fry from all of the information that's coming at him at supersonic speeds. So, this quirk overdrive essentially allows Izuku's brain to function like a supercomputer, the most advanced piece of technology in existence. It's kind of like an all-seeing eye quirk. But regardless of that, with Izuku sitting there, he would proceed to ace the test as the final section of the day would come, and Izuku expecting a couple of robots to be his challenge, he'd be fairly surprised when everybody would pretty much announce to Izuku that he's going to be facing off against All Might. Principal Nezu pretty much telling him that his goal isn't necessarily to defeat the symbol of peace, but to stop the symbol of peace. Izuku's goal here is essentially to stop him from attacking the hostages, and the hostages are going to be teachers who are going to be pitted in very dangerous situations, with them all kind of playing a role, kind of like an OVA episode, and Izuku just kind of being like, alright, that's it. Suddenly we'd get a zoom in shot of his calves with his cape flying in the wind, and it wind coming off of it, kind of like Metro Man, as we would then have Nezu say, begin! In a flash, Izuku would appear right past All Might, not even injuring him slightly, saving everybody so fast that nobody even had time to blink. All Might turning around would go, whoa, that was even faster than my prime, as then he would catch a glimpse of a fist right in front of his face, the wind pressure blowing everything back so much that a couple of buildings would actually be destroyed and All Might would be sent flying back. It's at this point that All Might, with sweat coming down his face, would think, guess that theory about quirks getting too strong really was true. He'd have a smile on his face as thinking of what Izuku's gonna do as a hero would honestly kind of excite him. These abilities make him worthy of being a hero even greater than he was, and he's probably not gonna have to deal with the traumas of having no rest due to the fact that he's, well, not human. And speaking of non-human, you guys are probably going to be watching this tomorrow, so here's a quick heads up. Pretty soon I'm going to be dropping What If Deku Was a Notsutsuki. It's a commission by a fan, but the whole thread of the story is Izuku coming to pretty much Earth and seeing how cool it is and kind of just changing his tune, being like, you know what? I like you guys. I think I'm going to help out. So it's kind of another really OP Deku situation, and I think a lot of you guys will love it. So when it drops, do me a favor, like the video, check it out, do all that good YouTube stuff. But anyways, back into the story. Izuku, after defeating this test and shocking everybody with the speed that he had done this, All Might, looking at Izuku with a sweat drop down his face, would simply congratulate him, saying, well done, young man, as Izuku would thank All Might for the congratulations, and everybody once again would kind of just like clockwork begin glazing Izuku, being like, whoa dude, that's amazing, you're even faster than the number one. Everybody just kind of realizing that, yep, he's the real deal, and they're all just side characters in his life. Izuku at this point would kind of just sit there laughing, as after this would take place, we would have the forest training exam happening. But with this timeline not actually having Shigaraki around, this would mean that we wouldn't even get the forest training camp incident happening, which means that instead of getting these really cool fights with Deku versus Muscular, which honestly wouldn't even be called fights if I'm being honest, we end up kind of just getting a very simple training arc, which we're able to just kind of glaze by. And considering that I don't know exactly what would happen if they were able to just train on their quirks, then I'm just gonna skip it. So with that being the case, and no Camino Ward incident and no All Might versus All for One, we instead are gonna be cutting to the villains, with All for One and Dr. Ujiko, his name blanked me for a second, pretty much having a conversation. All Might would be having like one of the little Nomus on his lap, as he'd be petting it back and forth like a creepy villain in a dark lighting, as Ujiko would stare at All Might and say, "Sir, how are we going to defeat him? He has the powers of a god. He's even more powerful than All Might was back in his prime, and even now we're still reluctant to face off against that damned All Might." With All for One looking at Dr. Ujiko and going, "Patience, doctor. Very soon we're gonna be having this boy in the palm of our hands." After All for One would say this, we would jump cut to a scene of villains ransacking Izuku's house, with their goal being to capture Inko Midoriya and pretty much make her a hostage for All for One, in order to potentially convert Izuku to the villain side or simply kill him, because All for One knows that if Izuku gets removed from the chessboard, they win. He's the king in this situation. And Inko Midoriya, well, she's the pawn. It's at this point that as they're capturing her, Izuku, all the way miles and miles distance away from his mother, would suddenly hear her screams, "Izuku!" Izuku, hearing that, his ear would perk up, as before anybody could even realize it, there would be a sonic boom and crushed earth where Izuku was standing. He would fly to the direction of Inko, arriving in nanoseconds, as seeing three distinct villains, with one being Muscular, Deku would punch Muscular across the face, sending him crashing through three different rooms in their massive house. He would crash into a car before looking up and going, "Looks like But then Izuku kind of just punches him in the face one more time and he's knocked out cold. The two remaining villains then place a knife to Inko's throat, and Izuku, all he can hear is the fear and despair in Inko's mind. She's going, "Please don't let me die, Izuku," in her head, and "Get away, it's okay." She's worried for her son. Izuku in this moment would have his rage boil to the surface as lightning sparks, similar to what All for One creates, would begin popping off his body. The air would grow cold as Izuku's eyes would turn bright red, and a beam of energy would shoot straight at the villain's hand. It's at this point that his gun would drop to the floor, and Izuku, then grabbing him by the throat, would lift him up, with the other villain aiming a bullet at Izuku's head and shooting, but the bullet would simply repel and hit the villain, causing him to fall unconscious and begin to lose blood. Izuku in this moment, holding the other villain by the throat, would stare at him with his laser vision activated, about to pierce straight through his skull and kill him. But he would hear Inko say, "Son, don't do it," and Izuku in this moment would calm down, placing the villain on the ground with his handprint indented on his throat. It's at this point that he would look at his mom, telling her that he needs to take her somewhere safe. As he would look at her and ask how in the world the villains appeared, they have an incredible security system. She would inform him that a portal just opened and all three of them were there. Izuku, hearing that, would think to himself, "So it was them." As we would get a flashback to what Izuku had whispered in Kurogiri's ear, the line about killing them, Izuku wasn't only talking to Shigaraki, but the organization as a whole, specifically the head of the snake. Izuku in this moment would take his mother to a safe place right next to Aizawa, knowing that if anybody could probably protect his mother, it would probably be the guy with the power to erase people's quirks. So Izuku in this moment would proceed to fly back to his house, where using his eyes and a brand new quirk, he would stare at everything that has happened, analyzing the scene and catching a slight glimpse of Kurogiri's quirk. Izuku seeing it for a second, or not Kurogiri's quirk, but like that little Nomu thing that had pretty much teleported them in there. Izuku would instantly be able to trace where the heck that thing came from, analyzing the quirk, and that it was pretty much a ripped off version of Warpgate, a much weaker version. After this, Izuku would turn, seeing a camera, since All for One had plotted to show Izuku video evidence of the fact that he had captured his mother, but luckily for Izuku, he had arrived before that could happen. Staring at it, Izuku would punch the camera, cracking it, as he would signal to All for One that he's coming. In the split second that they would have time to pretty much prepare for Izuku, All for One had already released every single Nomu. with Gigantomachia also being set on the scene and him waiting for the arrival of Izuku. The moment that Izuku would land, he would stare at All For One as hundreds of Nomus would fly at him. Weak ones, medium ones, high-end ones, and even the one on the same level that fought All Might, or technically at the USJ, because in this timeline it didn't actually fight All Might, that's in the original, it fought Izuku, so my bad. Anyways, with that said, Izuku staring at all of them and analyzing their quirks would think, pathetic, as instantly all of their heads would be ripped from their bodies. Izuku having rushed at them and also used his laser vision to cauterize them and prevent the Nomus from healing ever again. After Izuku would decimate each of the Nomus and the Nomus' blood would begin pouring on the ground, All For One watching this with awe in his eyes, he would stare on as Izuku would walk in front of him and ask him if he has any last words. It's at this point that Gigantomachia would throw a punch at Izuku, which he completely tanks, having ate that thing. Staring at All For One, he would ask him what his last words are, as he would be curious to find out whether All For One would beg for mercy in his final moments. However, All For One would simply accept his fate, telling him that his time has simply come. A bigger fish arrived at the pond. So, Izuku would snap All For One's neck, making his death quick and painless, as he would then turn towards Gigantomachia and, being pissed at the fact that the dude had tried to punch him to death, would then proceed to punch straight through Gigantomachia, destroying his head, shoulder, and arm, with the doctor crawling on the floor saying, "Wait, I'm just a doctor. Please, you spare me. Don't kill me, kid." But Izuku wouldn't listen at all. He proceeds to instantly kill the doctor, stomping on his head, splattering his remains everywhere, as Izuku, after this moment, looking around at all the dead bodies, would think to himself that this is going to be a hassle to deal with if this gets out there. So, Izuku, using his super speed, would clean up the entire situation, dumping their bodies off in the middle of an ocean, covering them with bags, and simply drowning them in the midst of all of this. After this, Izuku would clean the lab up and make it look as though nothing had happened here, with only a slight rumble having been heard in the instant that Deku had annihilated the Nomus, All For One, and Dr. Garaki. With that said, Izuku would fly back to Aizawa's side, with Aizawa questioning what he just did. Izuku would go on to explain to Aizawa that he had gone back to his home to see if there was anything else that the villains had tried doing, but Izuku would explain to him that it was all over and that luckily they didn't get anything else. Izuku would wonder why in the world they had gone after his place of all people, and he would wonder maybe if it was just due to the fact that they had tons of money. Aizawa would stare at Izuku, questioning him on whether or not he's telling the truth, but understanding that whether or not he was didn't really matter. Even if he wasn't, what were they going to do against it? He would look to Izuku, telling him that at the end of the day he still has to obey hero procedure, looking at him and telling him that he'll let this slide, but he needs to go by the book next time, not knowing whether Izuku had done what he had thought or if he genuinely was telling the truth. So, to play it safe, he had simply given him a slight warning. After this, Izuku would hug Inko, telling her that he's so sorry that he even let that happen in the first place. With his quirk, he should have sensed that that was happening, and he should have went to go help her even sooner. Inko in this moment would stare at Izuku, saying, "No, it's okay," as Izuku would hear the screams of a young girl in the distance, flying off towards her before Inko could even finish her sentence and knocking the villain out. Izuku would handcuff him before returning to Inko and hearing the last things of her sentence, no one having realized what happened. Izuku would smile, as this is something that he had been accustomed to doing for quite a while now, stopping hero incidents before they could even start with only screams. You know how normally there's like, people like going crazy and stuff like that because there's like a villain attack? Deku hears them and stops them before the scream could even end. So that's how much of a busted hero he is. And so, as more time would pass, Izuku's destruction of villains would just get easier and easier. Overhaul, forget about it. The dude would absolutely decimate him, with him hearing Eri one day after she had ran away from Overhaul's home, not even taking the internship with Sir Night-Eye. And so, arriving there in the alleyway with a golden flash, Overhaul would be inside of a dumpster in a garbage bag, Mirio feeling a gust of wind and gold lightning before he was just gone. It was almost as if the Flash had pulled up and just stopped everything instantly. So, after filing a police report and taking Eri in, everything had kind of been resolved, and that's exactly how things would play out for all of Izuku's life, just completely destroying any and all villain activity and being the greatest hero in the entire world. Oh, and did I mention Izuku also had a quirk that allowed him to age at the slowest pace possible? So he's going to be able to protect the world for years to come. Which, speaking of, the final incident that Izuku would resolve would be a massive meteor threatening the destruction of the Earth. It would begin hurling at the planet as alerts would be going off in everyone's phone. But Izuku, knowing that that was coming close and wanting to, have something to do, looking at it as though he was just simply taking out the trash, would fly off, having finished a date with his girlfriend from class 1A, flying straight through the meteor and destroying all the little bits and pieces of rubble that would scatter with his laser vision, just kind of ding, 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 destroying them all, leaving nothing left, as he would fly back to Earth with Izuku's girlfriend, which I'm going to leave up to you guys, asking him what happened. Izuku would explain nothing much, with Izuku's hero work mainly consisting of him leaving calling cards behind right on the villains that he captures, since he defeats them so unbelievably fast that none of them ever have the chance to even see Izuku, and when they do, it's a big deal because Izuku's that proficient as a hero. He would ultimately make crime rate in Japan drop to a whopping 1%, with crime across the entire planet dropping as a result of this, with Izuku being able to be all over the world at once, him being sort of an Omni-Man, Superman, whatever you want to call it man type of figure. Metro Man is probably the best way to put it. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's where I'm going to be wrapping up What If Deku Had a Superhero Quirk. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys thought about this one, and be sure to keep on the lookout for What If Deku was an Otsutsuki, and also probably What If Deku had a lava quirk, which I'm going to be dropping very, very soon. He's going to be having the powers of a Kainu from One Piece, thanks to another commission by somebody else. So be on the lookout for those two videos that should be coming out soon. But with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.